Hello, everyone. This is Eva. As you can see, today we are doing our interview session a little bit different because of the whole post-COVID-19 lifestyle. So we are doing a Zoom call to make sure that everyone is safe. I'm very excited to introduce Erin, who is the business development at Hedgehog Technology. Thank you so much for being on this Zoom call.
Thank you so much, Eva, for having me. I'm really excited. And Hedgehog Technologies is a boutique electrical engineering firm based in Vancouver, and we specialize in solving complex engineering challenges in renewable energy and industrial controls.
What is your role there? Like, are you on the technical side or are you more like on the marketing sales side?
So I'm the director of business development, but my undergraduate is in electrical engineering. So I consider myself an electrical engineer. But I have a master's degree from Arizona State, my MBA, and a master's in global management from Thunderbird School of Global Management. And so I work on the business development side and with marketing on our sales initiatives to make sure that we're meeting our strategic initiatives and meeting the needs of our clients. But I have an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and I worked as a design engineer for about 8 years.
So today we are actually going to talk about how to build your industry expertise in a niche market with webinar. Before when we talked with each other, you told me your company experimented with webinar as a way to kind of communicate and connect with prospect. I know B2B and especially in a technical industry is hard, right? Because you only target a certain niche market. How technical do you want to be? But how marketing, quote unquote, sales do you want to be, right? And there's a fine balance. Interesting when you told me you guys tried out a webinar as an experiment. So I really wanted to learn more, from the beginning to the end about that project, how you guys decided to do it, how do you approach it, what was the result?
Right. Yeah. No, this is a great topic and one I'm passionate about because we do a lot of thought leadership and articles within engineering magazines. So that's very outward. So they do a great job on that. It's outward marketing, right? And so one of the initiatives that we had was webinars. So we could try to have a bit more interaction. And even now with the COVID, continuing those even more, so we can, be able to get some more interactions and also generate helpful information. One of the things that we really like to do is help our clients, like how can we help you? And so the webinars, we want to be able to build a series of webinars where our clients can go to those as databases for learning about things and asking more questions.
Got you. So how did you come up with the idea, or like how did you bring that idea even, to the team? Say like, hey, let's try a webinar, even though we never done it before. How do you convince them, right? Putting all those risks. It takes a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, right? It's a lot of work. So I've been a product manager in B2B. And so as a product manager, I used to do webinars frequently for product training to our value-added resellers. And it was incredibly beneficial because again, it was some more two-way conversations. And I'd follow up with in-person travel, but those webinars, especially when there were new releases or feature releases, you could have some sales trainings and trainings of their product management team, and you get some questions and they would ask more questions versus just outwardly sending information. So with that experience, the discussion internally was like webinars can really help engage our audience, and I've had some data on how those can benefit our clients. So everybody was very excited about it, but I also knew how much work it was. So, and it was a lot of work, especially being the first one in the company's history. Myself and the marketing coordinator, we worked very, very hard, and the rest of the sales team too. It was a lot of work to put it together for the first one as a company. If you do them regularly, like as a product manager, I would do them, every 3 months. And so it was a lot less work to just add a feature and do a 30-minute webinar to here's the latest feature. So but we thought it was a really good initiative. Everybody agreed. So when I discussed that with the team, there was 100% support for it.
Awesome. So what was the topic that you and your team eventually decide, and how did you go about actually promoting the first webinar in the company?
Yeah, so the topic that we ended up deciding on was Solar 101. So the first question we asked ourselves was, what topics could we consider that aligns with the company's expertise? So we had a list of, like 4 to 5, and then we had to choose which one. We chose rooftop solar 101 because there was a lot of promotions like on LinkedIn, on people were interested in solar. There were some companies, releasing more consumable products for solar. So the thought was that that would be more engaging versus some of our other topics were even more niche, if you will. And so we're like, okay, we'll start with that one. There wasn't any other additional data-driven decisions where we had feedback from clients that 90% of our clients are asking for that. But we had inquiries from clients who are looking to do rooftop solar in a commercial setting. So that, with that interest, we decided to do that.
Yeah.
So the promotion, you asked about the promotion. So the promotion was, being an engineer and coming from product management, there was a, flow chart and a plan and, a lot of scheduling. And then myself and the marketing coordinator worked on the promotion. So my background in B2B was targeted lists for the webinars were much more effective in getting signups. We started there based on my experience, and we went through our CRM, scraped our CRM, and put a very targeted list together of about 70 people within our CRM that we sent out. And we had, the first day, we had a handful of signups from that targeted list, which was very successful for us. And so we were really excited, but we had set an internal metric of we have to have at least 10 people attend to actually run through the seminar.
Gotcha.
So we wanted the number of registrations to be over 10 because not everybody comes, right? So we did the targeted list first, scraping our CRM, and then we ran a LinkedIn ad campaign in a specific solar group. So it was so we picked a solar group, and our marketing coordinator did some research on which solar group to pick, and then we ran a LinkedIn campaign for that group. And then because many of our engineers are passionate about renewable energy, they are part of renewable energy groups, so they also posted there.
Okay.
And that got us a lot of signups as well. So that three-tiered approach got us 24 signups in total.
So it hit the KPI, you guys had it internally for your first experiment.
Correct, yeah, so we hit that KPI, hit that first KPI.
Nice.
So being the first webinar to hit your first KPI is really exciting. And my communication with the team is, our metric is 10 people to attend. And as we got closer to the webinar, I said, we'll look to see what that metric, how we're getting to that metric. And if we're not meeting it, we'll reassess and readjust. But it was very exciting for the company's first webinar to hit that first metric. So then the pressure was on, right? So like, okay, now we got to really make sure everything is put together and everything is tested out. And
it's like, oops, okay, people signed up. Now I guess we have to actually put them on.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that because sometimes when you do experiment, you do want to have some sort of benchmark. It's okay, if I don't hit this benchmark, let's evaluate. Maybe we shouldn't do it. We can just send an email, say, hey, sorry, whatnot, right? I know it's kind of like a lean startup approach as well, and I really like that approach. But then when you hit the target, like, Okay.
Oh, okay, that worked.
That's very interesting. Before you mentioned about the people that you guys kind of target at with organic math and paid advertising on LinkedIn. So what kind of persona were you looking at? Like what kind of requirement did you use to define, okay, this is the person or this type of
Yeah, so because we're B2B, the rooftop solar and the solar projects we work on are complex. They're not commercial, and so they're industrial. They're large, large buildings or industrial buildings, manufacturing buildings. In the remote communities, there's complexities on adding solar, locations, logistics, inverters. So we targeted not on B2C, we targeted on B2B. So other engineers, specifically clients that have reached out to us on rooftop solar. It was very targeted towards commercial industrial type rooftop solar. And even though we stayed very high level in rooftop solar 101, it was still targeted towards that. So we weren't going to necessarily consumer, even though we did add information that even if you were a consumer adding rooftop solar, there's still information that you can learn from there. But it was targeted to those type of clients.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good message there, because you mentioned that, like there's particular type of group of people you guys want to talk to.
Yeah.
So obviously you are not going for the mass audience, because I think sometimes when you decide a KPI, and I like how honest you are, like that's our first experiment, 10 people, that's our KPI. I like the honesty, because like it's easy to go with like, oh, let's just go for like, I want 50 people, 100 people right off the bat, right? But
yeah,
honestly, when you go for such a niche market, like pretty technical industry, it's not the same as when you're selling a clothes where everybody needs it.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it being the first one, I didn't want to set them, you still want to dream big, but I didn't want to set the initial metric so high that was completely unrealistic.
And it will be discouraging for your team as well.
It's just, exactly, the whole team is discouraged. It's like, well, our metric was 200 people and we had 5. We're like failures, but you're not, right?
Yeah.
So a realistic metric where you can also still give value. So that's why I picked 10, because you can still have interactions in a webinar with 10 people. And so you want to be realistic, but still, set something that will be valuable. And when I was doing B2B product training, because we sold through value-added resellers, we didn't have 100 value-added resellers. We had a handful, or to a dozen. So I have found like having more than 12 value-added resellers, because you had multiple people from the teams, it got too big and I couldn't answer all the questions. So, it's like, well, we're going to go with 10. We'll see how this works. And then if we need to change it, we'll change it, right? So especially in small to medium businesses, flexibility, agility, review the metric. If it's not working, see why and then adjust appropriately.
Yeah, I love that approach. It's like, I think it's also easy to get into the overconsumption habit. Well, let's do all the research, let's find out all the metrics. But I think you mentioned last time when we kind of talked beforehand, like just pick a metrics, do enough research, but pick a metrics, and you can adjust it later. It's not that I have to be set in stone and like public.
Right.
It's not like forever.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can adjust it.
Yeah, awesome.
The key is that you adjust and you learn, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you put out the message out. Now people signed up. Time to run the webinar. How did that sort of logistic go, and what was the goal, for that webinar for you guys?
Yeah, so the goal, there was a few goals for that webinar. One was engagement. So then the thought was, well, how do we help ensure engagement when you don't already have a relationship with the audience? So we set up polls. We put a script together. So the slides were put together. We put a script, a general script, and then within that script we set polls, like when the presenter is going to ask a poll to help ensure engagement and get conversation started. So, you know, we started off with too many, and then we went to too few, and then so we, you know, we're kind of about in the middle on polls, and that helped get some feedback early on and keep things engaged with the audience. And then we had Q&A afterwards. We also tried to limit it to 30 minutes because, you know, we didn't want to go too long, where people are just like, well, now we're at an hour and I'm done, right? Yeah. So we tried to do around 30 minutes, so it wasn't too short and it wasn't too long. And then after the survey ended, or after the webinar ended, we had a survey that went out, and we limited that to 3 questions because we wanted to get some amount of data back as well. And so we didn't want too many questions and too little. So, you know, at first it was too many, and then one's not enough. And so we ended up with 3.
That magic number 3.
Exactly. We're like, okay, we're gonna do 3. And because we wanted to get data too, but we wanted to make sure that people who did attend, that we had almost 100% people filling out that survey. So we did 3. Yeah, we did good. We did very good on the survey fill out. So that part we were very happy with that. And with the polls, we still had people. We had people asking questions in the polls. And you know, our presenter, if you know the people weren't asking, he would answer a typical question that a lot of clients ask, and then that would also help generate some more questions in the polls. And so that was also a technique that was working to help make sure the engagement was there.
So during the webinar, did you use PowerPoint, or did you do like kind of how we were doing, like basically you were the speaker and then there's conversation going on? Like how did that work?
So we did PowerPoint. So it was a slide deck. We used GoToWebinar because we have a GoToMeeting account, and I've used multiple platforms, and there's a lot of similarities with all of them. But we used PowerPoint and you know the highlighter tool and walking people through slides. But it wasn't a Zoom type with someone presenting in front of a screen where other people were also on Zoom. It was you know, I don't want to say traditional webinar because that may not, I don't think that's the correct term, but it's PowerPoint with going through slides.
Gotcha. And at the end there was a Q&A, and in between there were like question pool to make sure that people were actually engaging through the whole time.
Correct. So when the poll would come up, in the GoToWebinar as an actual poll where people could select.
Gotcha.
So they'd see a new slide with the poll question, and then they could actually select their answer. And then the presenter would get a report of who answered which questions.
Gotcha. And the timeline was 30 minutes.
30 minutes in total, approximately. Like if it was 28 or 36, that's, you know, that's okay, but yeah.
6 minutes overtime, no, just kidding.
Yeah, 6 minutes, oh my goodness, yeah.
But 30 minutes is good. Like I personally have been on some webinar because I'm kind of curious. You know, as a marketer, I'm curious what other people are doing as well. And a lot of webinar, when they go like over 30 minutes, to be honest, it's always first 10 minutes or maybe 5 minutes talking about themselves. And then there's 20 minutes on like 3-point, and then the next 20 minutes is just talking about whatever they want to sell. And then here we go. If you don't buy today, the time.
I mean, and because we've all been part of those webinars, and that was like the opposite of what we wanted to do. Yeah, we really wanted to try to be mindful of that we weren't doing that. Because like the goal of our webinars is to create a knowledge base that clients can go to learn from, not to generate like direct leads from the webinar. Like, for our business, the leads come in as people need help. And so our point, like we very early on set a point that the webinar is to teach and to generate a knowledge base for learning about things.
It's more like an educational piece for your prospect and the client, wherever they want to, like later on, somebody else wanted to learn about this topic, they can just go on and watch it, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what kind of question did you ask at the end? You mentioned you also like sent out a survey to, you know, to get a sense of how engaging, how happy people were. Like what question was it?
So the three questions that we ended up asking was, the first one was basically like, how satisfied were you with the webinar on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the most satisfied? And our internal metric was 7 or above. So if the average was below 7, we missed something. Like that was the metric I set, was like, it needs, you know, that's our target, 7 or above. And then the second question was, how likely are you recommend this webinar or other webinars from Hedgehog to, you know, to your network? That's a scale from 1 to 10. And then the third was, what would you like to see in the next webinar? Open-ended question. So someone could fill it out within a few minutes. And the third question, if they didn't want to respond and didn't want to put anything, they didn't have to. So we didn't set up the survey where they had to put in an answer there.
Okay. What can you share, like, what was the sort of like a response your company collected from all the participants?
Yeah, so our average was just over 7 for recommendations. So like we met our metric again, and so it was. I want to make sure like the team celebrated that, because that's a huge.
I was just going to say celebration time.
Yeah, celebration time, because it was a huge accomplishment, right? The amount of work that goes into it, like, it's a huge accomplishment. And then how likely you were to refer, that was also just slightly over 7 with the average, so that was also very good. The responses for what would you like to see in the next webinar were a bit varying, because so we didn't get as much data from that. But the first 2 questions we had a nice average, and the standard deviation wasn't, you know, really high. So that was very good. And then the range from the open-ended question was kind of, everybody had a different response. So that didn't give us as much data as we expected, but the first 2 did. So that was good.
Nice.
And I'm a fan of standard deviations and averages, and to look at that, because, you know, just to see, because if your standard deviation is really, you know, really large, even with a small amount of people, it's like, what does that mean?
Yeah, average can be pretty deceiving.
Something. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So what was, I guess, like, what kind of lesson did you learn from that experiment? Like, what is your plan for the next step? Is webinar going to be part of like the regular program right now after the first initial experiment? Like,
yeah, so we plan to do more webinars. Our initial plan was every 3 months. With everything happening within the organization, we probably won't do it every 3 months. But the next ones we're targeting for sometime in June, which is coming up next month. So
that's pretty quick.
That's in progress. We're in progress for that one. So that'll probably be towards the end of June. But we had a lot of learnings from it on what worked and what didn't. So there's some things that we'll definitely keep, like the polls were really good. The Q&As were really good. I think having more interaction would be better, and we all talked about that, because you know, our president and founder, he's done a lot of in-person seminars, and so the interactions, like even when I'm in a seminar, when you're involved and interacted, like you learn more, you're more engaged. So we're taking that away from the first webinar, is how can we do some more engagement within the webinar. The polls are still good, the Q&A are still good, but can we do an example or a breakout workshop that's short, like a very, 5-minute type of thing, to get the engagement so people are learning more. And then the targeted list was very effective, so we want to continue doing that. But then we want to grow the attendees. So we're looking at methods of how can we grow those attendees. Do we make a bigger targeted list within our CRM and open it up a bit wider than as targeted as we did? So instead of 70, that we open up that a lot more. And so we're looking at methods there. The LinkedIn ads, we'd probably run again, but we'll target those to specific groups, and not just do a wide. And we set budgets. We set a budget for that. So if, we don't go over that budget. And then the groups and the network that we have within our engineers, we'll use that as well, because that was also very positive.
Nice. Yeah, you mentioned before about the like running the LinkedIn ads. It's funny because kind of like time just worked out perfectly. I did a video like I believe 2 weeks ago, also on like difference between LinkedIn, Facebook, and Google. And LinkedIn ads is tricky because LinkedIn ads can get quite expensive. But if you are talking to a very niche audience, which in your case you are, and the product value is pretty high, then it could actually make sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, like even like you said, like the Google ads, right? Like if you don't have a strategy and you don't have a targeted plan, your Google ad can cost you a lot of money, right? And it's not getting you a lot of value. So
yeah, if you go to the random keyword, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm a big supporter of targets, and if you target it and you're not getting enough, then you expand it. But you expand it, you start targeted and then start to expand, because if you go really big, the ads are really expensive, right? Yeah,
start small and then like watch it closely, adjust it, and then expand it.
Yeah, and experiment with it. You're like, okay, well, I'll try this, and I'll just set a small budget, and if it didn't work, okay, let me look and see why it didn't work.
Yeah,
versus just a large budget and be like, well, that wasn't successful.
And then 10K later, oh, we learned that this was successful. That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
The last speaker I had was Danny. He is like very big on this math, experiment, they have like set of budget, just, the goal is not necessarily ROI right away, but really learn and see what works, don't work. And if it works in your case, then, apply bigger, maybe make it to a program and do it like on monthly, bi-weekly, or whatnot base.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I 100% support what he's saying as well. Like, experiment on small scale.
Yes. I'll probably connect you too.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So that was really good case study to learn, from the first-hand experience. For any company, especially, if somebody also in, similar industry, B2B targeting like a really niche audience, and maybe the deal size is a lot bigger and the sales cycle is a lot longer. What kind of recommendation would you give them if they want to also kind of test out webinar as one of the due gen channel? Yeah,
so start small, experiment, and it may take longer than you expect, right? So if you need results next month, don't put all your eggs in the webinar basket, right? So plan it over the year, ideally plan it over the year or an 8-month period, and start small. And even if you host a webinar for 5 of your existing clients, but it's valuable to them, that's better than doing a webinar where you have 100 attendees and they're not really a match for you.
So the message I keep hearing is like, make sure you're providing value. Don't just go for the bigger number.
Right. Which is hard, because like you want to dream really big, right? You're like, I did this webinar for 1,000 people, but no one had any value for it.
Yeah, exactly.
The 2 things I always try to do with my teams too is set a metric, and then we evaluate it. Was it a right metric or a wrong metric? Meaning, do we need to adjust the metric and why? And then reminding the team the overall end goal. Our end goal is to help and create a knowledge base. So everybody keeps that in mind while you're trying to put all of this together.
Nice. I like that. Thank you so much for sharing the whole experience of the first webinar with your company and all those lessons you learned and the tips you provided. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Eva. I really enjoyed talking with you. This is great to talk through it, and thank you very, very much.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to talk to someone outside of my little apartment.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.